All right, so to continue with my progression of thought and how I got closer to understanding my grandpa's metapsychiatry. So in 20 like I said, 2014, 2015, 2016, my grandpa stopped teaching me because I described my grandpa. We got in an argument because I felt like my grandpa, so his whole thing was, independence is so important. It's so important to be independent. But I discovered the theory of everything. I needed help and support from my parents, but I felt like my grandpa's whole make Ryan just wants to be independent thing. It made it so that they abandoned me and they wouldn't help me. And they threw me to Kauai. And like I said, all the crazy stuff probably wouldn't have happened if I wasn't forced to live on Kauai because my family abandoned me and they told me I had to live on Kauai. But anyways, I told my grandpa that I felt like he was a big aspect of the problem because his whole thing was like, be independent. Independence is important because if you're independent, then you transcend the ego and you're not in dualistic ally enemy software where you depend on the people and they're your allies, but if they don't do what you want, then you're enemies. And this is dualistic software, and this is confirming the illusion of the self. So I told my grandpa, like, I felt like his philosophies and his teachings did not help. And also at that time, I didn't really understand my grandpa's teachings. I didn't really understand dualistic software and stuff. So as I was saying, I became a right winger for a little bit, but then I switched back to being a left winger kind of. And the way that happened is like I said, like one example was I was writing some raps, some rap music on my friend's timeline, and my friend was like half Filipino and he had a white relative, but he said something racist against Jews, right? And he says something like, "Oh, no wonder why Jews are going extinct," because I wrote a rap that had like cuss words in it, right? And he said something bad against Jews, and I think that the reason why I always kind of wanted to race mix the white people was because I always saw white people as a threat to the Jews, and my friend was like partly white, and I always just wanted to. I think it's a Jewish thing where you want to mix the white people, and that's the way that I always was. So I went back to being a leftist. And the other thing was like I said, my grandpa was telling me, like, I asked my grandpa, so grandpa, because I always thought he was a right winger because he's always like, he was an Ayn Rand fan. I always thought that Ayn Rand was anti-communist, more pro-white, anti-communist. So I was confused. I was like, my grandpa's always an Ayn Rand fan. He's against welfare. And he always said things that made me think that he was more of a white supremacist. So I'm like, you're a white supremacist, huh? But then I asked my grandpa, I was like, Grandpa, so is white supremacy, is that a good thing? But he's like, no, well, white supremacy is dualistic software. Now I understand what he's talking about, but at the time I didn't understand. So what he's saying is, if you transcend the ego, you are just outside of yourself and you're in inquiry and, all this stuff. When you transcend the ego, you're not focused on the self. You transcend the self. But again, like my grandpa would even say, like, let's say someone is a white supremacist nationalist. Well, that's better than, that could be a step in the right direction because at least he's a part of something greater than himself, and that can help him to lose himself. But then there's steps beyond that. And again, there is no formula for the flow, my grandpa would say. But at this time, I didn't understand that. So at this time, I'm confused. So I'm like, okay. So I remember when I became kind of a right winger, I was a fan of Islam. This was like 2013. I was a fan of Islam. Or no, not 2014, 2015. And the reason why I liked Islam was because it was against abortions. It was against promiscuity and stuff. And I thought that this was good for the white race, but then I asked my grandpa what he thought about it. Like I said, and my grandpa was like, well, Muhammad, blessed and peace be upon him, wasn't necessarily a right winger. And I was like, what? And so I started doing some research, and so I started studying the left wing interpretations of the Quran, where they would say, like, there's this one part of the Quran where it says that Muhammad, or that the woman needs to have a man chaperone her when she's in the courtroom. And according to the right-wing Muslims, it's because women are more stupid and they lie and stuff like that, right? So it's kind of like anti-women. I was like, yeah, they're the white supremacists. They want to subjugate women to maintain their race, right? They're the nationalists. And they're not the communists. But then when I started studying this more, I was looking at the left-wing interpretations, and the left-wing interpretations are saying, no, Muhammad was bringing the Muslims closer, the Arabs closer to equality, where it was a concession that you have a chaperone come in, but before, women weren't allowed to speak in court at all. But eventually they said that Muhammad would have wanted women to be able to speak without a chaperone. So I was like, okay, so I was like, maybe my grandpa's right. Maybe Muhammad, blessed and peace be upon him, was not a right winger. So I started studying the left wing interpretations of the Quran. So again, I'm confused because my grandpa's telling me that white supremacy is not the flow. So he made me go back to my default. And he's telling me, the flow is transcendence of dualistic software and transcendence of the ego. So I'm like, well, so then he's for race mixing. That's what I thought. And my grandpa didn't explain things. He was a bad teacher, so he didn't explain things. So he confused me. So I was like, okay, transcend the ego. So you must be for race mixing. Okay. Transcend dualistic software. Oh, dualistic software must be, like white supremacy but transcending dualistic software, that must be for race mixing. So I went back to my default because my whole life I saw myself as a Jew and I wanted to race mix the white people. I always was anti-white. I was always a communist. I was always pro-abortion, pro-feminism, pro all that stuff because I saw all that, people who were anti-feminist and anti-abortion. I saw them as white supremacists. I'm like, you guys just want to maintain the white race. You guys are just Nazis. And I saw myself as Jewish. But again, I just wanted, I wanted no borders and all the races to mix and the white people to be destroyed. So, but then my grandpa confused me. So he made me go back to that default of being anti-white. So I'm like, okay, so race mixing is good. So then but like I said, my grandpa stopped teaching me because we got in that argument. So then I made one of my based on true story books to try to get my grandpa to teach me again. But again, I didn't understand my grandpa's teachings. So in my book, I'm trying to show my grandpa, like, look, grandpa, I transcended dualistic software. And I posted this online and I'm like, I no longer am a white supremacist, but I tried to make it seem like my whole life I was a white supremacist, which was a lie. My whole life I saw myself as Jewish and I was anti-white communist. I wanted to mix the white people. But in this book, it was just it was lies. It was stupid. And I was just like, my whole life I was kind of white supremacist, which was a lie. And I was like, because I didn't want to admit that I was always anti-white and I wanted to race mix the white people, because I didn't want to, because I really, in the back of my mind, I wanted to do what was best for the Jews. And I thought, if I admit that I was a Jewish person who wanted to mix the white people, that would not be good for the Jews. So I just tried to make myself out to be just like, I was always a white supremacist. So I'm writing this. I'm like, but now I've transcended dualistic software and I can't believe that I was against the black people because black people are so awesome and they've done so many great things for me. And I basically, it was like, again, I wrote like an anti-white book where I'm saying like, white and black are just social constructions and, it's just based around economics that they created these invalid, socially constructed labels that they attach to people in order to maintain and entrench power into the elites and blah, blah, blah. And it was just like, it was basically just a communist manifesto again that I wrote, anti-white. And again, my grandpa would say, yes, I was expressing dualistic software, but I didn't realize that because he didn't teach me yet. Now I know I was expressing predator-prey dualistic software toward white people. Again, I wanted to mix white people. So another thing I wrote in that book, in that based on true story book, was I wrote that, my whole life I believed in Darwinism, which was true. I did believe in Darwinism my whole life. But I was trying to say, and Darwinism is what made me into a white supremacist because I wanted to believe that if you protect and promote your genes, like I wanted to. When I believed in Darwinian evolution, I wanted to protect and promote my genes, and I was trying to say like, and I believed that I had white genes, so I wanted to protect and promote the white genes. But the fact of the matter was, my whole life I did believe in Darwinism. My whole life I was a Marxist and I was a materialist, but that's not what made me into a white supremacist. Like I said, but this is what I wrote in my based on true story book, which was just baloney. I was just like, yeah, my whole life I believe in Darwinism, and that's what made me into a white supremacist. But that was false. I tried to blame my belief in Darwinism on making me into a white supremacist, but that's completely false. When I believed in Darwinism, really the reason why I wanted to promote Darwinism and remember, I wanted to destroy Christianity. I wanted to say that Jesus was just a Jew who died to save the Jewish people by converting the Romans to a religion that would deteriorate their society and protect the Jews. And it told them, give the Jews Israel and give them money. So it's like, it was just a Darwinian trick. That's what I wanted to argue. Christianity was just a Darwinian trick. And I wanted to show evidence that even Elisha tricked the Gentiles. And, I wanted to say it was just all Darwinism. It was all just a trick to save the Jewish genes. And even like the Jonah, when he converted the Ninevites, I wanted to say, oh, well, he converted the Ninevites because they were the enemies and they could have hurt the Jews, but by converting them, he destroyed them. And it even says that the Ninevites were destroyed later in the Bible. So I was like, and the same thing with Jesus, it was just all a Darwinian trick. And I wanted to say that because I wanted to destroy Christianity because I knew that Christianity helped maintain the white race. And it maintained a vision that helped maintain the white race and the morality of Christianity. So I was a typical Jewish Marxist. I wanted to just completely undermine spirituality. I remember one time when I was in college, I watched this video of this like Jewish woman give a lecture on Hegel and Marx, and she was saying how Hegel was a German and he believed in spirituality, and Marx was was a more of a materialist, but you could tell that she didn't like Hegel and she liked Marx, and she's like, yeah, change this world. This world is what we need to change and stuff. Because she was anti-white. She wanted to destroy the white race, like me, and I liked her ideas too. I was like, yeah, Hegel's bullshit. I didn't like spirituality. I saw spirituality as white supremacist, maintaining the status quo, maintaining all that. And I wanted to completely uproot and destroy the status quo and make the black people overtake the white people. So, but, in my Based on True Story book, I was like, yeah, I believed in Darwinism and that's what made me into a white supremacist. But the fact of the matter was, it was the opposite. When I believed in Darwinism, I was not a white supremacist. That's not what made me into a white supremacist. When I believed in Darwinism, I believed in Darwinism because I wanted to undermine Christianity and say it was just, it really, the only reason why in Christianity they're against abortion is because that's good for the white race to be against abortion. And, the only reason why they're against why they're against women being promiscuous is because that's not good for the white race. And so, so I wanted to actually, uphold Darwinism and say it's all just Darwinism. That's the only reason, it's just patriarchal Darwinism. That the reason why the Bible is patriarchal is because, men wrote it and they have Darwinian inclinations to want to protect and promote and preserve their genes. And that helps to promote tribal genes to subjugate women. So, so the reason why I wanted to promote Darwinism was because I wanted to undermine religion. I wanted to undermine Christianity, especially because I saw it as maintaining the white race. So that's why I was so into Darwinism and materialistic Darwinism. So, but in this Based on True Story book, I was trying to argue the opposite. I was like, yeah, well, I believed in Darwinism and that's what made me into a white supremacist in 2014, when really my whole life I never admitted that my whole life I was a Marxist who wanted to destroy white people, and I believed in Darwinism my whole life. Because I didn't want to admit that because I wanted to help the Jewish people. So in this book, it's even more sinister. I'm trying to say like, oh yeah, my belief in Darwinism is what made me into a white supremacist. No, when I believed in Darwinism, I believed in it because I was anti-white. Because I was anti-white. I saw myself as Jewish and I was anti-white, and that's why I wanted to believe in Darwinism, because I wanted to undermine and undercut Christianity and religion. But in this book, I argue the opposite, and I was like, but now I've transcended dualistic software, and now I recognize that race is a social construction. So I went back completely to my default, back to my Jewish default of wanting to mix the races. Like, now I understand that race is a social construction and there's no such thing as white and black. And again, my grandpa would say I was expressing dualistic software, predator-prey, dualistic impersonal orientation toward white people again. But I thought that I was doing what my grandpa was teaching me. My grandpa's like, transcend the ego, transcend dualistic software. And I'm like, okay, so be for race mixing, because I didn't understand what my grandpa was teaching. So in this book, I'm trying to say like, yeah, now I've transcended dualistic software and now I'm in the flow. But I wasn't in the flow. I was still had a predator-prey orientation toward white people. But I didn't know that because my grandpa didn't teach me well. My grandpa just confused me. So I'm like, well, I'm not a white supremacist anymore. So I wrote this book trying to make my grandpa teach me again, because my grandpa stopped teaching me. And I thought, well, if I show him that now I've transcended dualistic software, he'll teach me again. But again, so I showed my grandpa the book and I put it online, but my grandpa read it and he's like, yeah, I'm still not going to teach you anymore. And I'm like, what? I clearly transcended dualistic software. What are you talking about, grandpa? But my grandpa's like, I'm not teaching you, Ryan. He said, I'm not interested in teaching you anymore. He said, my grandpa's excuse was, he was like, the reason why I'm not going to teach you anymore is because I just want to focus on, meditation and transcending. He would say that he wanted to transcend thoughts, and he just wanted the rest of his life just to focus on meditation and stuff. But like I said, but now at this point, my mom and dad wouldn't talk to me. I'm trying to talk to my mom and dad, and my mom and dad hadn't talked to me for years. Really since high school, I'd been estranged from my parents, and now my grandpa wasn't talking to me. So I was basically isolated, and I just wanted to learn from my grandpa. If my grandpa would have taught me more, maybe I would have broke out of this anti-white Jewish communist stance sooner, but my grandpa wasn't teaching me. So I'm just confused at this point. So I'm just like, I want my grandpa to teach me. And so, but like I said, I was hanging out with my friend Rohan, who was kind of like a hippie type of thing, and we got in a fight. And then my grandpa, after me and Rohan got in the fight, he felt bad for me and he started teaching me again. And I'll get into what my grandpa started teaching me.